1994. Three young women walked home from a farmer's market in a quiet Appalachian town and vanished. For a year, no one knew what happened. Until one summer evening, inside an abandoned barn, a discovery was made, and it changed everything. The sun was dropping low behind the Appalachian ridges, painting the sky in streaks of fire. In that quiet valley town of West Virginia, no one imagined that an ordinary summer afternoon would become the beginning of a mystery still unsolved 3 decades later. People remember the sound of laughter drifting from the farmer's market as three young women, Emily Parker, Sarah Lopez, and Hannah Miller, walked arm in arm with paper bags full of peaches and bread. A shopkeeper swore they stopped at his stall, teasing one another about who would burn the first pie. A mother pushing a stroller recalled the sight of them waving at neighbors on Main Street. To everyone, it was nothing unusual. Three friends, home for the summer, sharing one more day together. But by nightfall, panic was rippling through the town. Families sat down to supper with empty chairs. Parents called friends' houses again and again, their voices rising with fear. The last clear memory anyone shared was of the girls standing at the bus stop near the old wooden church, waiting for the evening route that should have carried them safely home. Drivers insisted they never boarded. From that moment on, the three seemed to vanish into thin air. Sometimes the most tragic stories begin in the most ordinary places. This one began on a summer evening when the laughter of three young women echoed through a small American town. Echoes that would never return. Tucked deep within the Appalachian Mountains, the town of Mill Creek looked like it had been lifted from an old postcard. Fewer than 2,000 people lived there, spread across wooden houses with peeling paint and porches that faced winding dirt roads. On Sundays, families filled the pews of the white-steepled church. On Fridays, teenagers gathered near the gas station at the edge of town, leaning against pickup trucks, sipping sodas, and trading the latest gossip. Mill Creek was the kind of place where neighbors mowed each other's lawns when someone fell ill, where every wedding and funeral was attended by nearly the whole community. Life in Mill Creek moved at a slow rhythm. The railroad had long stopped running, and the mines that once gave the town its heartbeat had closed a generation earlier. Many young people left for college or jobs in the cities, but summer always brought them back to visit parents and grandparents. The local farmers market became the town's gathering place. Under strings of bare bulbs, vendors sold jars of honey, baskets of tomatoes, and homemade pies, while bluegrass music played from a battered radio. It was here, in this ordinary ritual of small-town life, that Emily, Sarah, and Hannah reunited that August afternoon in 1994. Nothing about that day felt unusual. The cicadas buzzed loudly in the thick summer heat. Children ran between stalls with sticky fingers from melting ice cream. Friends paused to swap news about marriages, illnesses, or plans for the fall. The three young women blended seamlessly into this picture, smiling, chatting, carrying groceries, until the moment the sun began to sink. What no one realized was that the familiar roads winding out of town, the hillsides dotted with oak and pine, and the quiet bus stop by the church would soon transform from a backdrop of everyday life into the center of a riddle that still grips hearts to this day. Emily Parker had always been the one people leaned on. At 21, she was studying nursing at a community college in Charleston, drawn to the idea of helping strangers in their most fragile moments. Her father often said she had a gift for healing, a calmness that steadied anyone around her. That summer, she returned home to Mill Creek, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, a stethoscope tucked proudly in her backpack. Neighbors noticed the way she greeted everyone with warmth, like the girl who'd never lost touch with her roots. Sarah Lopez was different, spirited, restless, full of color. She worked as an apprentice at a salon in town, practicing the art of cutting, dyeing, and styling with hands that moved quickly and confidently. She dreamed of owning her own place one day, a storefront with bright mirrors and laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. Sarah was known for her sharp wit. She could make friends laugh even when life weighed heavy. That afternoon at the market, a vendor remembered her trying on a wide-brimmed straw hat, twirling playfully in front of her two friends as they clapped and teased her. Then there was Hannah Miller, the steady one. She had taken a temporary job at the local agricultural bank, filing forms and answering phones, while waiting for the chance to be hired permanently. Hannah was pragmatic, focused on building a life close to home. She still lived with her parents on the outskirts of town, helping with chores, baking pies on Sundays. To her family, she was dependable, a daughter who never broke a promise. That weekend, she had plans to start work on Monday morning. The fact that she would vanish the night before made her absence even harder to explain. Together, the three formed a circle of friendship that had endured since childhood. They had walked to elementary school side by side, learned to drive on the same country roads, shared whispered secrets at sleepovers beneath glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to bedroom ceilings. Though their paths had diverged, one in medicine, one in beauty, one in finance, the bond between them was intact. They were like sisters, an old teacher recalled, her voice trembling years later. That August day, their reunion at the farmer's market was nothing extraordinary. Friends catching up, sharing dreams, savoring youth in a town where time often stood still. But perhaps that's what makes their story so haunting. Emily, Sarah, and Hannah were not strangers passing through. They were woven into the fabric of Mill Creek itself. To lose them was not just to lose three young women. It was as if the town had lost a part of its own heartbeat. And so, when evening fell and their laughter faded into silence, the shock spread quickly. In the span of a few hours, Mill Creek shifted from a place of familiarity to one of unanswered questions. The final hours of that Saturday seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. As the sun slipped lower, the farmer's market began to thin. Vendors packed up crates of unsold peaches, children begged for one last lemonade, and the sound of fiddles faded into the hush of evening. Among the crowd, three familiar figures moved with ease. Emily Parker balancing a grocery bag on her hip, Sarah Lopez joking about a recipe she'd never try, and Hannah Miller checking the time on her worn wristwatch. Several people remember those minutes clearly. A retired school custodian swore he saw the girls pause at the corner bakery, arguing about which pie to share later. A teenager working at a fruit stand recalled Sarah tossing him an apple with a grin, her laughter echoing down the street. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just three friends weaving through a town that had watched them grow up. At around 6 o'clock, the trio made their way toward the bus stop by St. Matthew's Church. The old wooden building, with paint peeling from its steeple, cast long shadows across the road. From a nearby porch, a woman rocking her infant saw them waiting, playfully nudging each other, their voices carried by the humid air. To her, it looked like the picture of youth, bright, carefree, unaware. But from that moment forward, the story bends. The bus scheduled to arrive that evening never recorded their presence. Every driver questioned later insisted they hadn't seen the girls step aboard. It was as if the bus stop became a dividing line between the known and the unknown. 1 second, three young women laughing in plain view. The next, silence. By dusk, the heat gave way to a heavy stillness. Street lamps flickered on, casting circles of pale light along Main Street. Cars passed the church, their headlights sweeping across the bus bench. Yet no one noticed anything amiss. No cries, no struggle, no hurried footsteps, only absence. When families called their names into the night hours later, that absence grew unbearable. For parents expecting their daughters at the dinner table, for neighbors who had waved goodbye just moments earlier, it was inconceivable. How could a simple walk from the market to a bus stop end in disappearance? The last ordinary memory of Emily, Sarah, and Hannah was etched into the minds of witnesses who thought nothing of it at the time. It was a scene that seemed so harmless, a few friends waiting for a ride home, and yet those moments at the bus stop would become the final image the town of Mill Creek would ever carry of them. When the sun dipped below the ridges and supper tables filled across Mill Creek, 3 chairs remained empty. At first, no one panicked. Parents assumed the girls had lingered at a friend's house or perhaps caught a later bus. But as the minutes ticked into hours, unease settled like fog over the town. Emily's father checked the clock again and again, pacing the living room as the smell of cooling meatloaf drifted from the kitchen. Sarah's mother dialed every number she knew, her voice trembling as each call ended the same. "No, I haven't seen them." At the Miller household, Hannah's younger brother sat on the porch steps, scanning the darkening road, hoping headlights would finally bring her home. By 9 o'clock, the calls grew urgent. Parents knocked on neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had spotted the girls. Some had, The apple vendor remembered Sarah's laugh. The churchgoer swore she saw them at the bus stop, but none had seen what came next. At 10, flashlights appeared. Men in work boots and women in sandals fanned out into the woods that bordered town. They searched the creek bed, the narrow trails, even the abandoned barn near the highway. "Emily! Sarah! Hannah!" Voices rang into the night, echoing back with nothing but the chirp of crickets. The sheriff arrived just before midnight. His cruiser lights washed red and blue against the church walls as he organized a grid search. Deputies trudged through knee-high grass, radios crackling in the humid air. More townspeople joined, carrying lanterns, dogs straining at their leashes. In one home, a grandmother lit candles in the window, whispering prayers. In another, children pressed their faces to glass, confused why their parents were rushing out with lanterns. For Mill Creek, a place where people locked doors only out of habit, the idea of three young women vanishing without a trace was unthinkable. By dawn, exhaustion showed on every face. Shirts clung with sweat, voices rasped from shouting. They had checked culverts, sheds, even the shallow wells long unused. Not a footprint, not a hair ribbon, not a sign. When the first light of Sunday morning spilled over the hills, the truth began to harden. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a late-night detour or a prank gone too far. Something darker had taken place, and it had stolen 3 lives from the heart of the town. The first night of searching ended without answers, but it carved a permanent scar. Parents returned home, still leaving porch lights burning. Neighbors sat on stoops, unwilling to go inside. A silence heavier than the mountain air draped itself over Mill Creek, and in that silence, fear was born. What had begun as an ordinary Saturday had become the start of a nightmare that no one in the valley could wake from. By Sunday morning, Mill Creek was no longer just a sleepy mountain town. It had become the center of an unfolding mystery. The sheriff's office opened a case file marked missing persons. 3 female, age 21. To the officers on duty, the situation at first seemed straightforward. Young adults sometimes left without warning. Maybe the girls had slipped away to the city for a weekend adventure and simply failed to tell their parents. But the families bristled at the suggestion. Emily had a nursing exam scheduled for Monday. Hannah was due to report for her bank shift at 9 a.m. sharp. Sarah had appointments booked at the salon where she apprenticed. These were not girls who disappeared on whims. Sheriff Thomas Reeves stood outside the courthouse steps that morning, reporters already circling. "We're treating this as a routine missing persons case," he told them, trying to project calm. Behind closed doors, however, deputies whispered about how unusual it was. 3 young women, all vanishing together, all last seen at the same place. Investigators retraced their path through town. At the bakery, the owner recalled their laughter. At the fruit stand, a boy remembered Sarah's playful toss of an apple. Near the church bus stop, multiple witnesses swore they saw the girls waiting. But beyond that moment, the trail ended. The bus drivers were questioned one by one. Each insisted none of the girls boarded that evening. No tickets purchased, no faces recognized, no entries in the logbooks. It was as if they had vanished in the space between standing on the curb and stepping onto the bus. Deputies combed the nearby woods again, this time in daylight. They found nothing but dew-damp leaves and broken branches from the night's frantic search. Dogs picked up no scent. Helicopters borrowed from a neighboring county circled overhead, blades chopping the humid air, scanning the ridges for clothing, movement, anything, nothing. Inside the sheriff's office, maps of Mill Creek and its surroundings were tacked to the wall, red pins marking search grids. Volunteers filled the lobby, waiting for assignments. Coffee cups piled on desks as exhaustion and frustration mounted. Every lead led back to the same dead end, the bus stop by the old church. By the week's end, Sheriff Reeves faced the town in a tense community meeting. Folding chairs scraped against the gymnasium floor as neighbors demanded answers. A father shouted, "How do 3 girls just disappear?" A mother wept openly, clutching a photograph. Reeves raised his hands and admitted what everyone feared. "At this point, we have no evidence of where they went." The early investigation left Mill Creek suspended between hope and dread. On paper, it was still a missing persons case. In the hearts of the families, it was already something far more terrifying. By the second week, Mill Creek was no longer searching alone. News vans rolled down Main Street, satellite dishes rising like metal trees against the mountain backdrop. Reporters leaned into cameras, their polished voices declaring, "Three young women vanish in broad daylight. Still no answers." What had been the town's private nightmare was now broadcast across living rooms nationwide. Residents felt the change immediately. Photographers prowled front yards, snapping pictures of families as they clutched framed portraits of their daughters. Microphones were pushed into the faces of weary parents, demanding comments, demanding grief on cue. Some families cooperated, believing that publicity might bring tips. Others shut their doors, blinds drawn tight against the blinding lights. The town's fragile unity began to splinter. Neighbors who had searched side by side with lanterns now whispered suspicions. In a diner booth, someone muttered that maybe the girls had run off together, embarrassed by small-town expectations. At the grocery store, others speculated about hidden enemies, unpaid debts, secret romances. Every theory, however wild, found an audience desperate for answers. The sheriff's office felt the pressure. Each morning, journalists demanded updates, critics accused investigators of incompetence, and politicians phoned from the state capitol asking for progress. Inside the station, deputies argued about leads that went nowhere. An old pickup spotted on the highway, a scream someone thought they heard in the woods, a stranger passing through town. Each story unraveled under scrutiny, but the whispers remained louder than facts. Even church pews carried the weight of division. During Sunday service, prayers for Emily, Sarah, and Hannah were offered, yet parishioners exchanged cautious glances. Was someone sitting among them responsible? Could a longtime neighbor hold a secret that dark? Mill Creek, once defined by trust, now felt haunted by suspicion. For the families, the intrusion was unbearable. Sarah's mother spoke on national television, clutching her daughter's favorite scarf, pleading through tears. "Please, whoever knows something, help us." Emily's father refused interviews altogether, muttering that cameras were vultures feeding on his loss. Hannah's brother lashed out at reporters camped on their lawn, his anger boiling over at the relentless questioning. The media circus amplified every uncertainty. When a local hunter claimed he found a scrap of fabric near the creek, the story flashed across headlines before police even arrived, only to discover it was part of an old picnic blanket. Each false lead widened the rift between residents who trusted the authorities and those convinced something was being covered up. By month's end, Mill Creek had changed. The town that once rallied together in the first desperate nights was now fractured, its streets buzzing with rumors, its fields trampled by camera crews. Hope was still alive, but it was tangled with doubt and anger. The disappearance of Emily, Sarah, and Hannah was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a spectacle, and the very spotlight meant to find the truth had left the town feeling exposed, raw, and divided. By the summer of 1995, the rhythm of Mill Creek had shifted. The initial storm of headlines had faded, cameras had moved on, and outsiders spoke of the case as yesterday's news. But for the families, time had frozen. Every August day felt like a wound reopening, every cicada's song a reminder of that lost evening. It was during this uneasy anniversary that a discovery reignited the town's fragile hope. A farmer named Dale Peterson had gone to clear out his late uncle's storage shed on the outskirts of Mill Creek. The structure, weather-beaten and leaning against the tree line, had been overlooked for years. Dale expected nothing more than rusted tools and broken jars. Instead, in the dust of a far corner, he found a worn canvas bag. Inside lay a collection of items that stopped him cold. There was a driver's license bearing Emily Parker's photograph. Next to it, a compact mirror Sarah Lopez had bought at the farmer's market that very afternoon. Entangled among the straps was a hair clip Hannah Miller's mother recognized instantly, the one she had pinned in her daughter's hair before church the week prior to the disappearance. When police arrived, the shed was cordoned off, evidence bags filled carefully. Families rushed to the scene, their knees buckling as objects they thought gone forever were laid out before them. Emily's father held her license for a long time, unable to speak. Sarah's mother wept into the small mirror, remembering how her daughter had admired it in the sunlight. Hannah's brother clenched his fists, torn between relief and rage. Yet the discovery raised questions as painful as it was promising. The shed had been searched the year before, more than once. Deputies swore they had combed through every corner. How, then, could these belongings suddenly appear? Had they been overlooked in the chaos of the first days, or had someone deliberately placed them there later? Experts examined the items. They showed little weather damage, inconsistent with a year of exposure. To investigators, that suggested movement, that the possessions had been hidden elsewhere and only recently deposited in the shed. But who would do such a thing, and why? To taunt the families? To divert suspicion? Or was it the mark of someone watching, keeping control of the story even from within the shadows? The town once again found itself divided. Some clung to hope. Maybe the girls were alive. Maybe this was a breadcrumb trail leading somewhere. Others felt dread, convinced the items were proof of foul play, staged by hands that knew far too much. The one-year anniversary vigil, once meant to honor memory, became charged with new tension. Candles flickered against tear-streaked faces as families held the newly discovered artifacts close, while townsfolk whispered about the chilling possibility that the truth had been hiding nearby all along. The shed had offered the first tangible clue in a year, but instead of clarity, it deepened the fog, leaving Mill Creek more unsettled than ever. By 2004, 10 years had passed, yet the mystery of Mill Creek refused to fade. The missing posters had long been torn down, but in diners and church basements, the names Emily, Sarah, and Hannah still lingered in whispers. The case had grown cold, the files thick with dead ends. Then unexpectedly, new voices emerged, voices that only complicated the silence. One came from a man named Roy Henderson, who had lived on the edge of town back in the 90s. Out of nowhere, he walked into the sheriff's office, claiming he had seen the girls that night. According to Roy, he spotted them near the logging road after dark, walking with someone he couldn't quite place. At first, his words seemed like a lifeline, a fresh spark for a weary investigation. Deputies rushed to the scene he described, combing the underbrush, measuring the distance to the bus stop. But as questions deepened, Roy's story began to unravel. His timeline shifted, details changed. One moment the figure was a middle-aged man, the next it was someone much younger. The more he spoke, the less reliable he seemed. Not long after, the sheriff's phone rang with another shock. A drifter, already known to police for erratic behavior, confessed outright. He said he had killed the three girls, described taking them into the mountains, even pointed to a spot where he claimed their remains lay buried. Search crews swarmed the ridge he named, turning over soil, bringing in cadaver dogs. The earth yielded nothing. Psychiatrists later revealed the man had a history of false confessions, chasing attention through horror stories that were never true. For the families, the roller coaster was cruel. Emily's mother clutched at each new statement with trembling hope, only to collapse when it fell apart. Sarah's brother grew angry, lashing out at reporters who breathlessly repeated every claim. Hannah's father, his hair now grayed, muttered that it was worse than silence, because hope raised and crushed in cycles carved wounds deeper than grief itself. Even townspeople found themselves torn. Some wondered if these men were liars or if their inconsistencies came from guilt-twisting memory. Others feared the real culprit still lived quietly among them, watching as chaos spread. Suspicion, once cooled, began to smolder again. Sheriff Reeves, older now and worn thin, admitted at a press conference that the case was no closer to resolution than it had been 10 years earlier. "We're chasing shadows," he said, the lines on his face carved deeper by disappointment. The false testimonies left Mill Creek more fractured than before. Instead of answers, they added layers of doubt. Instead of peace, they stirred the ache of not knowing. A decade had passed since three friends laughed together at a bus stop. Yet the truth remained elusive, buried beneath rumors, confessions, and contradictions that led nowhere. And in the homes of three families, porch lights still burned through the night, silent beacons waiting for daughters who never came home. By 2014, 20 years had passed since Emily, Sarah, and Hannah vanished. The town had changed. New storefronts lined Main Street. Children who once searched with flashlights had grown into adults raising families of their own. Yet for the families of the missing, time had not moved forward. Every August, they returned to the same church steps, candles in hand, photographs pressed to their chests, asking the same unanswered questions. In those 2 decades, technology had leapt ahead. DNA analysis was sharper, databases larger, forensic labs capable of drawing meaning from fragments once dismissed as useless. Detectives reopened the evidence box. Emily's license, Sarah's compact, Hannah's hair clip. They hoped that under microscopes of the new age, something hidden might speak. Swabs were taken, fibers tested, digital scans uploaded into national systems. Weeks stretched into months, but the results returned the same. Nothing conclusive. Cold case units reviewed old interview tapes, digitizing hours of witness testimony. Voices that once felt alive now sounded ghostly, captured on flickering VHS. Specialists mapped timelines with software, cross-checking against regional crimes. Still, no link emerged. The mystery of Mill Creek remained stubbornly sealed. For the families, hope began to split into two kinds. Emily's father, aging and frail, clung to the possibility that technology might finally deliver what the sheriff's boots-on-the-ground search could not. He clipped every article about DNA breakthroughs, highlighting paragraphs in yellow. Sarah's mother, however, had grown weary of false dawns. Each news story promising new leads ended in disappointment. Her faith slowly eroded. Hannah's brother, now raising children of his own, admitted quietly to friends that he feared the truth might never come. Around town, the case became both legend and scar. Teenagers whispered about it on summer nights, daring each other to walk past the old bus stop. Outsiders moved in, unaware at first, then stunned when neighbors told them the story. For the older generation, it remained a shadow they carried, proof that even in a town where everyone knew everyone, the unknown could still swallow people whole. Detectives from the State Bureau offered assistance, their laptops glowing in the dim sheriff's office. They brought tools that seemed futuristic to the deputies who had once tracked clues with pen and paper. Yet, as one investigator later admitted, technology can sharpen the lens, but it can't fill in what isn't there. 2 decades on, the truth felt further away, not closer. Every test that came back empty reminded Mill Creek of what had been lost. Not just 3 young women, but the certainty that answers always arrive with time. For the families, the ache was constant. For the town, the silence was deafening. And through it all, the porch light still glowed, waiting against the dark, as if refusing to let hope die completely. By 2025, 3 decades had passed since the summer evening when Emily, Sarah, and Hannah vanished from Mill Creek. Time had reshaped the town. The old hardware store had become a coffee shop. The gas station now sold craft beer. New families moved into neighborhoods once filled with familiar faces, and children pedaled bicycles down streets where their parents had once searched with flashlights. For many of the younger generation, the disappearance was a rumor, a story told in hushed voices during sleepovers. They knew the names but not the weight of them. To older residents, though, the memory was carved deep. Some avoided speaking of it at all, as if silence could dull the pain. Others still lit candles every August, refusing to let the girls fade into myth. The families had changed too. Emily's father had passed away years earlier, his obituary noting only that he had never stopped searching. Sarah's mother lived quietly with relatives in another state, her health fragile, her hope reduced to gazing at old photographs. Hannah's brother had built a life in the city, raising children who only knew their aunt from framed pictures on the mantel. Yet whenever he returned to Mill Creek, he found himself driving past the bus stop, staring at the place where laughter had last been heard. The sheriff who once led the search was long retired, his case files gathering dust in the county archives. Younger detectives glanced at the thick folders, but quickly turned back to active investigations. Without new evidence, the mystery remained just that, a mystery. Still, the case never completely died. True crime podcasts retold the story, documentaries replayed grainy news footage, and online forums buzzed with theories. Was it an abduction? A cover-up? A mistake that spiraled into tragedy? Each theory gave strangers the illusion of closeness to the truth, while the real families continued to live with emptiness. Around town, silence grew heavier than words. At church, prayers for the missing girls were folded into general blessings, rarely spoken aloud by name. On Main Street, locals hesitated when outsiders asked about the bus stop story, their voices faltering, eyes lowering. Mill Creek, once bound tightly by trust, had learned to live with an unhealed wound. 30 years later, the unanswered questions lingered like shadows on the mountain ridges. Where had the girls gone? Who knew the truth? Would anyone ever step forward? For some, the hope of resolution had faded to almost nothing. For others, even the faintest chance was enough to keep porch lights burning year after year. Because in Mill Creek, memory had become both burden and promise. Silence might hide the pain, but remembering kept the girls alive, if only in the hearts of those unwilling to forget. 3 decades on, Mill Creek still carries the weight of a question with no answer. Emily, Sarah, and Hannah were last seen laughing at a bus stop, and no one knows where that laughter went. Time has not explained it. Investigations, testimonies, and technology have not solved it. And yet the story endures, because some mysteries refuse to let go. But within the silence, lessons remain. The ordinary, the chatter of friends at a market, the promise of a ride home, can be more precious than we realize. The family's devotion, stretched across 31 summers, reveals a love stronger than absence. And the community, though fractured and fearful, still remembers 3 young women who belong to it. Hope, too, has proven difficult to extinguish. Porch lights still burn, year after year, not just for the girls, but for the belief that truth may surface. Perhaps in a confession whispered late in life, or in a breakthrough that technology has yet to bring. Maybe the truth is closer than anyone imagines, or perhaps it will never be known. Either way, the act of remembering becomes its own kind of justice. In Mill Creek, people say the names Emily, Sarah, and Hannah softly now, as though carrying something fragile. Yet each time their names are spoken, they are not gone. They live in memory, in love, and in the refusal to forget. And that is why stories like this must be told. Because even when answers never arrive, remembrance keeps the lost from vanishing twice. If this story touched you, let it live on. Share it, talk about it, keep their memory alive. And if you want to hear more stories that remind us of faith, hope, and the fragile beauty of everyday life, please like this video and subscribe to Silent Traces. Together we can ensure that voices from the past are never silenced.